Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we are tackling one of the most important documents in U.S. history, the Bill of Rights. And trust me, it's way more than just a historical text. It's basically the rule book that spells out your freedoms and tells the government where the line is drawn.
To really get why this document is still a huge deal, let's just jump right into a situation. Picture this. You're at a public protest. Things are happening. You pull out your phone and start recording. Can you do that? Can an officer just come up and demand to search your bag? The answers aren't buried in some complicated law book. They're right there in the Bill of Rights.
So here's our game plan for today. First, we'll get into why the Bill of Rights even exists. Then, we'll cover your 5 core freedoms, what happens if you're accused of a crime, how the government's power is limited, and then we'll circle all the way back to that protest to see how it all plays out.
Okay, let's dive into our first section. Before we get into the nitty-gritty of each right, we have to understand the big picture idea. I mean, what was this whole thing designed to do in the first place?
Well, the Bill of Rights basically has a two-part mission. It's not just a list of things you're allowed to do, it's also a list of things the government is told it can't do. It was added to the Constitution to solve this huge debate about how you balance the power of the government with the freedom of the individual.
I love this way of thinking about it. It's a shield and a fence. The Bill of Rights acts like a personal shield, actively protecting your individual liberties. But at the exact same time, it builds a fence, drawing these really clear boundaries that the federal government is not supposed to cross.
Now for the next section, which gets into probably the most famous protections that you have, all found in the very First Amendment.
Okay, so the First Amendment bundles together 5 massive freedoms that are basically the engine of a democracy. You've got freedom of religion, speech, the press, assembly, and petition. And if you think about it, they all work together, right? Freedom of speech doesn't mean much if the press can't report on it, and you need a voice to have a peaceful assembly. They're all woven together to make sure ideas can get out there and challenge authority.
But your protections don't just stop at expressing yourself. What happens if you find yourself in legal trouble, maybe even accused of a crime? Well, the Bill of Rights lays out a super clear set of rules for the justice system too. This timeline shows how you're protected at every single step of the way. During an investigation, the Fourth Amendment says no unreasonable searches. That means authorities usually need a warrant, and they can't get one without a good reason. Then, if you're accused, the Fifth Amendment gives you the right to remain silent. You can't be forced to incriminate yourself, and protects you from double jeopardy, which means you can't be tried for the same exact crime twice. At trial, the Sixth Amendment guarantees you a lawyer and a fair jury. And finally, the Eighth makes sure that any punishment isn't cruel or unusual. It's really a complete shield through the whole process.
So on top of your personal freedoms and your rights in court, the Bill of Rights keeps building that fence we talked about, setting even bigger limits on what the federal government is allowed to do.
And there are 2 other really big fences put in place here. First, the Second Amendment, the right to bear arms. Now, this is one of the most hotly debated rights today, with all kinds of arguments over whether it's about an individual's right to own a gun or a collective right for state militias. Second, you have the 10th Amendment, which is huge. It basically says that if a power isn't specifically given to the federal government, then it belongs to the states or to the people. This sets up a constant push and pull over power between the national and state governments.
All right, let's bring this all full circle and connect it back to that scenario we started with. We've gone through the theory. Now it's time to see how these rights actually work in the real world. Okay, so you're back at the protest, phone in hand. Now that we've walked through all of this, what protections do you actually have in this moment? Let's connect the dots. Just showing up peacefully? That's your First Amendment right to assembly. Shouting your opinion? That's freedom of speech. And what about recording? Well, courts have often said that recording events is a form of news gathering, which is protected under freedom of the press, even if you're not a professional journalist. And if an officer wants to search your bag or phone, that's where the Fourth Amendment kicks in, protecting you from an unreasonable search unless they have probable cause.
So, what's the big takeaway here? The Bill of Rights isn't some dusty old document that sits in a museum. It's a living, breathing guide for that constant balancing act between our freedom as individuals and the power of the government. And understanding it doesn't just make you a more informed citizen, it makes you an empowered one. And that leaves us with one final thing to think about. In our world today, with all this new technology and all these new social issues, every single one of these rights is constantly being tested and reinterpreted. So the question is, which of these rights do you think is the most important, or maybe the one that's facing the biggest challenges in our society right now?